In an alternate reality, let's imagine what would have happened if Hurricane Katrina hit New York City instead of New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina, which made landfall in the Gulf Coast in August of 2005, was one of the most destructive natural disasters in United States history. New Orleans bore the brunt of its fury, but what if the storm had shifted east and directly struck the heart of New York City? The Big Apple, known for its iconic skyline, bustling streets, and dense population, would face a completely different set of challenges compared to New Orleans. New York City is home to over 8 million people, making it one of the most densely populated urban areas in the country. The sheer number of people would be a massive hurdle for evacuation. In the case of a storm like Katrina, people would need to leave the city quickly, but with so many residents, that would be incredibly difficult to manage. Highways, bridges, and tunnels would become clogged with traffic, and public transportation would be overwhelmed. The complexity of evacuating so many people would cause chaos, and not everyone would be able to leave in time. In addition to the challenge of evacuation, New York's infrastructure would face extreme stress. The city's subway system, which serves millions of commuters daily, would be at risk of flooding. The city's tall skyscrapers, which are a hallmark of its skyline, would also be tested by Katrina's intense winds. With wind speeds reaching over 170 miles per hour at its peak, these buildings could experience significant structural damage, and even windows could be shattered by flying debris. On the streets, residents would feel the effects of the storm surge. New York's coastal areas, including Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn, would be especially vulnerable. The storm surge, a massive rise in sea level caused by the hurricane's strong winds, could flood these low-lying areas, including key parts of the city that are home to many of its most important buildings and businesses. As the storm surge hits, floodwaters could push into the subway tunnels and submerge underground stations, making it impossible for the transit system to function properly. The surrounding streets would quickly become rivers, turning daily life into a chaotic scene. Another challenge would be the city's unique geography. Unlike New Orleans, which sits below sea level, New York City's elevated areas could provide some protection from the initial storm surge. However, those high-rise buildings would act like wind tunnels, amplifying the storm's ferocity as gusts raced through narrow streets. The combination of flooding, strong winds, and the threat of falling debris would put immense pressure on the city's emergency response systems. The city's first responders, firefighters, police officers, and medical teams would be stretched thin, trying to save lives, restore order, and prevent further damage. Emergency shelters would be a necessity for thousands of displaced people. Given the scale of the disaster, setting up enough shelters for millions of residents would be a massive task. Relief efforts would need to be organized swiftly, and supplies such as food, water, and medical supplies would need to be distributed immediately. But with the entire city's infrastructure in chaos, delivering these essentials would be no easy task. In this early phase of the storm, New York City would be facing extreme weather conditions, rain pouring down relentlessly, wind howling through the streets, and the distinct sound of windows shattering as debris flew through the air. The immediate priority would be to secure people in place, offering shelter where possible, and then trying to get ahead of the floodwaters before they overtake the city. The city's residents would need to find safety wherever they could, whether it be in tall buildings or stronger, more secure structures. Evacuation plans would quickly shift into rescue operations, with emergency teams going door to door, searching for survivors in flooded homes or people trapped on the streets. As the storm approaches, New York would be preparing for the worst. It's not hard to imagine the chaos in this bustling city as it faced the might of Hurricane Katrina, one of the strongest hurricanes ever to make landfall in the United States. The stage would be set for a disaster of unprecedented scale, and the question on everyone's mind would be, how would New York City survive the storm? As Hurricane Katrina continues its approach toward New York City, the storm's full power would begin to make itself known. By now, the city would already be facing the initial brunt of the disaster: rain, wind, and rising waters. But the worst would still be to come. With winds sustained at over 170 miles per hour and the storm surge pushing coastal waters to unprecedented levels, New York's low-lying neighborhoods would soon be overwhelmed. The financial district of Lower Manhattan, home to Wall Street and countless other key institutions, would be at the forefront of the damage. Flooding could reach several feet deep in these areas, submerging office buildings, residential, apartments, and underground utilities. Financial markets would be shut down, businesses would be forced to close, and any economic activity in the city would come to a standstill. given New York's role as one of the world's major financial centers. The impact of this would ripple out across the global economy, with financial markets around the world reacting to the city's shutdown. As the storm surge pushes further into the city, the impact on transportation would be even more severe. New York's iconic bridges and tunnels, which help connect the boroughs, would become lifelines for evacuation, but they too would be put to the test. The bridges might remain intact, but flooding would make many of the tunnels impassable, further stranding people who had hoped to flee. Without the subway system, which typically transports millions of people every day getting anywhere, would be a monumental task. With streets already flooded, getting out of the city would become impossible for many. For the people left behind, navigating the storm would become an increasingly difficult and dangerous task. The strong winds would tear through the streets, toppling trees, light poles, and even buildings. Debris would be flying everywhere, creating dangerous conditions even for those who were trying to find shelter. The city's population, already under stress from flooding, would face an additional threat in the form of these flying hazards. Every street, every block would become a potential danger zone as winds gusted through, shattering glass and sending debris in all directions. The storm's flooding would affect more than just Lower Manhattan. Areas like Brooklyn and Queens, especially those near the waterfront, would experience significant water damage. While some parts of the city sit on higher ground, the sheer volume of water being pushed inland would make it difficult for even the most resilient parts of the city to avoid flooding. Residential areas along the rivers, such as those along the East River and the Hudson River, would see massive water inundation, potentially swallowing entire blocks. At the same time, power outages would be widespread. The storm's intensity would take down power lines, knocking out electricity to large sections of the city. In many cases, this would leave neighborhoods without basic services like lighting, refrigeration, and air conditioning. Without power, heat would become unbearable, and essential communications would be interrupted. Hospitals would struggle to maintain operations without backup power, and emergency services would find it difficult to coordinate without the use of radios, phones, or computers. In the midst of all this chaos, the city's emergency responders would face unimaginable challenges. With roads blocked and tunnels flooded, first responders would have to rely on boats, helicopters, and other specialized equipment to reach those in need. Search and rescue missions would be underway as emergency teams attempted to reach people trapped in flooded buildings, especially in high-rise apartments or homes along the water, while the city's fire departments, police, and medical teams would be doing their best to help. The sheer scale of the disaster would make it difficult to save everyone. At the same time, the psychological toll on New Yorkers would be profound. In a city known for its hustle and bustle, the sudden stillness of an evacuated or half-submerged city would create a surreal scene. People who had never seen their city this way, flooded, abandoned, and dark, would have to adjust to a new reality. As they huddled together in shelters waiting for the storm to pass, they would also wonder how they could possibly rebuild after such a devastating event. The emotional impact of Hurricane Katrina hitting New York would be felt far beyond the immediate destruction. It would redefine the city in ways no one could anticipate. By this point, the city's streets would be unrecognizable. The skyline, which had once stood as a symbol of New York's resilience and strength, would be obscured by dark clouds and swirling debris. Even if the winds started to subside, the damage done to buildings, infrastructure, and homes would be immense. With every new flash of lightning, the full extent of the destruction would be revealed. Roads torn up, buildings collapsed, and floodwaters inching higher. As New Yorkers braced themselves for the storm to pass, the real work of recovery would be just beginning. As Hurricane Katrina begins to move further inland, New York City would find itself facing the aftermath of one of the most destructive natural disasters in its history. The storm, which has already wreaked havoc on the city's infrastructure, would leave the city reeling with the daunting task of recovery. The first priority would be ensuring the safety of the city's residents. With many neighborhoods still submerged under floodwaters, the authorities would have to continue their efforts to rescue people from flooded buildings and evacuate those who are still trapped. The damage to the city's infrastructure would be catastrophic. Roads, bridges, and tunnels, essential for both evacuation and transportation, would have suffered severe damage from the storm's flooding and high winds. Major roads leading out of the city, like the FDR Drive in Manhattan and the Long Island Expressway in Queens, would be rendered impassable, with debris scattered across entire stretches of the highways. Even as waters begin to recede, the damage to the roadways would make travel impossible, further complicating the evacuation process. While the city's subway system typically serves millions of commuters each day, it would be particularly vulnerable to the flooding. With water pouring into the underground tunnels, the subway system could be rendered inoperable for weeks or even months, severely limiting the city's ability to function normally. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority would face a Herculean task to repair the extensive damage done to the system, and this would have a lasting impact on how New Yorkers travel throughout the city. For a city so dependent on its public transportation, this disruption would be a blow to its daily life. In addition to the damage to the transportation network, New York's iconic high-rise buildings would also suffer significant damage. Many of these buildings are constructed with glass facades, which would be easily shattered by the hurricane's fierce winds. The impact of the winds could cause windows to break and debris to fly through the air, creating dangerous conditions for those still on the streets. Some buildings, especially older structures or those located near the waterfront, may have sustained significant structural damage, and there would likely be widespread reports of fires breaking out due to the storm's effects on electrical systems. While efforts would be made to restore basic services, power outages would continue to affect large parts of the city. The loss of electricity would leave residents without air conditioning, street lighting, and other essential services for days or even longer. The city's hospitals, already stretched thin, would have to rely on backup power, which may not be sufficient to handle the influx of patients requiring urgent medical attention. It is likely that the healthcare system would be overwhelmed, and many residents would have to wait for days to receive necessary care. Another significant challenge would be the contamination of the city's water supply. With floodwaters mixing with sewage, chemicals, and other pollutants, the water supply would likely become unsafe to drink. Residents would need to rely on emergency water distribution centers set up by the authorities, but getting enough clean water to everyone in need would be an ongoing struggle. Sanitation would also become a concern, as the city's waste management systems would be disrupted, further complicating efforts to maintain public health. The city's economy, already facing the immediate aftermath of the storm, would be deeply affected in the long term. Major industries like finance, tourism, and retail would be severely disrupted. New York's financial markets, which were shut down during the storm, would likely remain closed for several days, if not weeks. The disruptions in the global financial system would ripple out, affecting economies worldwide. As businesses try to recover from the damage, it would take months or even years for many of them to return to normal operations. Even as the city rebuilds, the economic toll of the storm would be felt for a long time to come. The human cost of the disaster would also be felt in the loss of life. While the full scope of the casualties would not be known immediately, the number of people displaced from their homes and forced to seek shelter in overcrowded facilities would be staggering. Thousands of residents would lose their homes, and many would be left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Finding shelter for such a large number of displaced people would be a monumental task. Emergency shelters would be established across the city, but space would be limited, and conditions in these shelters would be far from ideal. People would struggle to find basic necessities like food, clean water, and medical care, all while grappling with the emotional toll of losing their homes and possessions. The psychological effects of the storm would also be profound. For New Yorkers who had witnessed the storm's destruction firsthand, the emotional scars would last far longer than the physical damage to the city. Many residents would be dealing with post-traumatic stress, as well as the grief of losing loved ones or their homes. For many, the trauma of Hurricane Katrina hitting New York City would forever change how they view their city and their lives. The city's recovery would be a long and difficult process. The scale of the destruction would require an unprecedented effort to rebuild. Government officials, business leaders, and ordinary citizens would have to work together to restore the city to its former glory. The challenges of recovery would extend far beyond just rebuilding homes and businesses. New York would need to rethink its approach to infrastructure, disaster preparedness, and climate change, as the reality of living in a city that could be vulnerable to hurricanes would be impossible to ignore. Over time, the city would heal, but the scars left by Hurricane Katrina would forever be part of New York City's history. As New York City begins the daunting task of recovery, the focus would shift toward rebuilding the infrastructure and addressing the long-term impacts of Hurricane Katrina. The city's leadership, alongside state and federal officials, would work to coordinate relief and recovery efforts. While there would be a massive influx of resources, the process would take years, with many areas still struggling long after the immediate aftermath. One of the major concerns would be rebuilding the city's transportation system. The subway system, which had suffered extensive flooding, would require a complete overhaul. Many of the tunnels would need to be cleaned and repaired, and the electrical systems would need to be replaced. This process could take months or even years, and until then, the city's residents would have to find alternative means of transportation. Bus services would be increased, but with the subway out of commission, traffic congestion would worsen. Many commuters would likely opt for ride-sharing services, adding strain to the city's already congested roads. The rebuilding process would also extend to the city's utilities. Restoring electricity to the vast and densely populated boroughs of New York City would be a monumental task. Power outages would persist in some areas for weeks, especially in Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn that were hit hardest by the flooding. The city would need to improve its electrical infrastructure to ensure future storms don't cause the same level of damage. A focus on reinforcing power grids and backup systems would be essential. An investment in renewable energy sources might become a higher priority to reduce the city's dependence on vulnerable power stations. In addition to the physical reconstruction, the psychological impact of the disaster would remain an ongoing challenge. New York's residents, many of whom had already lived through the trauma of the September 11th attacks in 2001, would find themselves grappling with a new layer of fear and uncertainty. Mental health services would become a critical part of the recovery process, with counseling and support available for those affected by the storm's devastation. Schools, churches, and community centers would become essential hubs for healing, providing residents with the support they needed as they processed their experiences. The economic fallout from the hurricane would be felt across every sector of New York City's economy. The tourism industry, one of the city's largest sources of revenue, would suffer as travelers canceled trips, fearing continued disruption. Hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues would take a major hit, especially in the areas that had been most affected by flooding. Many businesses, particularly small ones, would face the difficult choice of whether to close their doors for good or attempt to rebuild. The unemployment rate would likely rise as businesses struggled to get back on their feet, and the city's workforce would face uncertainty as a result of the disaster's long-term impact on the economy. Insurance claims would pour in, but given the widespread damage across such a large and densely populated area, many insurance companies would struggle to cover the enormous costs. This could result in lengthy delays in compensation for homeowners and business owners, further exacerbating the financial strain felt by those affected by the storm. The government would step in to provide disaster relief, but the scale of the recovery effort would require sustained efforts from all levels of government. Amid all the destruction and rebuilding, the city would begin to rethink its approach to disaster preparedness. Hurricane Katrina's impact would leave a lasting legacy on the New York City's planning policies. The city would invest heavily in improving its flood control systems, building stronger seawalls and levees to protect against future storm surges. Zoning laws may also change to ensure that new construction is more resilient to flooding and high winds. Additionally, the city's emergency response plans would be overhauled, with a renewed focus on coordination and communication between different agencies to ensure a faster and more efficient response in future disasters. The storm would also spark a broader conversation about climate change and the role it played in the severity of Hurricane Katrina. The disaster's impact on New York City would likely lead to an increase in discussions about rising sea levels, stronger storms, and the need for long-term environmental sustainability. The city would work towards becoming more resilient to climate change, investing in green infrastructure and exploring innovative solutions for reducing its environmental footprint. In the years following the storm, New York City would begin to rebuild itself, but the scars of Hurricane Katrina would never fully fade. The disaster would serve as a reminder of the city's vulnerability to extreme weather events, and the recovery process would be a testament to the resilience of New Yorkers. With time, the city would return to its bustling, vibrant self, but the lessons learned from the storm would shape how it prepares for and responds to future challenges. Ultimately, New York City would recover, but Hurricane Katrina's impact would remain a part of its history. The storm would forever change how the city approaches disaster preparedness, urban planning, and its response to the growing threats posed by climate change. In the face of overwhelming destruction, the city's spirit would endure, and New Yorkers would continue to rebuild stronger and more determined than before. Imagine waking up one morning in the year 2025, and suddenly your phone has no signal, your Wi-Fi is down, and the power in your entire neighborhood has vanished. Not just your town or your city, Millions of people are in the same situation all over the world. This isn't the result of a power plant issue or a cyber attack. This is a full-blown solar superstorm erupting with the same strength as the Carrington Event from the year 1859, but happening today. Let's be clear, this is a hypothetical scenario, but it's one based on very real science. The Carrington Event was the most powerful solar storm ever recorded. Back then, it lit up the skies with bright auroras and even set telegraph systems on fire. Now imagine that same level of solar activity slamming into a world that relies on satellites, GPS, internet, and massive interconnected power grids. It's not just a science fiction idea, it's something experts say is possible and maybe even overdue. The sun goes through an 11-year cycle of solar activity. Some years are quiet, while others are loaded with flares and sunspots. During active periods, the sun can launch what's called a coronal mass ejection, or CME. That's when a huge bubble of charged particles and magnetic energy blasts out into space. If the timing and direction are just right, or just wrong, depending how you look at it, it can hit Earth straight on, and that's exactly what happened in 1859. But back then, people didn't have smartphones, air traffic control, or millions of miles of high-voltage power lines. All they had were basic electrical systems, mostly telegraph lines, and even those were fried. Some operators reported electric shocks from their equipment. Now fast forward to today, everything from planes to hospitals to stock markets depends on systems that are much more sensitive. If a Carrington-level solar storm hit today, we wouldn't just see pretty lights in the sky. In the very first hours, the Earth's magnetic field would go into chaos, power grids would be slammed with unexpected electrical currents, transformers could overheat and explode, high-frequency radio used by aircraft and ships might completely drop out. We could lose access to GPS signals, which are used by everything from delivery services to farming equipment. Even oil pipelines could be affected, with pressure and flow data going haywire due to false readings caused by magnetic interference. Satellites would be one of the first to suffer. The intense radiation could fry circuits and knock out communication satellites and weather monitoring systems. The International Space Station might have to power down or shift to a safe mode. All the services that rely on satellites, navigation, television, phone calls, internet, banking could fail within minutes. And this isn't something that would only affect one part of the world. This would be a global problem. That's what makes this scenario so scary. It's not a localized disaster, it's worldwide. And here's where it gets even more serious. The warning time would be very short. Scientists might only have 12 to 18 hours from detecting a major solar flare to the arrival of the charged particles on Earth. That doesn't give much time for governments or energy companies to shut down and protect sensitive systems. There are alert systems in place, like those run by NASA and the NOAA in the United States, but they can only do so much. Once the storm is on its way, there's no stopping it. So what would those first 24 hours look like? Chaos, panic, confusion. People wouldn't be able to contact loved ones, banks could shut down, emergency services might have trouble coordinating, traffic lights would go dark, air traffic control could lose radar, flights might be grounded, and this is just the beginning. The world isn't prepared for a solar event like the one that happened over 160 years ago. Back then, the worst that happened was some sparks and confusion. Today, a storm of that size would hit every part of our lives all at once with very little warning. That's just the beginning of what a Carrington-level event could do in the modern world. The real damage would unfold in the days and weeks that follow, as we'll see next. As the first day of the solar superstorm wraps up, the immediate effects are already devastating. With satellites and communication systems down, the next few hours become a critical time. Power grids, already overloaded with geomagnetically induced currents, begin to fail in large parts of the world. Some areas experience total blackouts, while others deal with rolling outages that could stretch on for weeks, depending on the severity of the damage. And it's not just the power. Transportation systems are in disarray. Without GPS signals, planes are grounded, ships can't navigate, and trains come to a halt. The chaos isn't confined to just the electrical and communications networks. The impact is felt across almost every industry. Hospitals struggle to function as backup power systems are quickly depleted, medical equipment heavily reliant on electricity goes offline, and critical systems for monitoring patient health and administering treatment falter. The consequences for healthcare could be severe, with urgent care centers unable to access patient records, or worse, unable to assist patients in emergency situations. People in need of life-saving procedures would find themselves at the mercy of an overwhelmed system that's barely hanging on. The financial markets are among the hardest hit. Global stock exchanges grind to a halt as trading systems collapse, unable to process transactions. In an era of digital financial systems, this could lead to massive disruptions in buying, selling, and investing. The flow of money would cease, causing panic, particularly in the banking sector. People would rush to ATMs to withdraw cash, but the machines might not work, leaving many with no access to their funds. While the full economic impact of this solar storm would take time to reveal itself, it's likely that the damage would amount to billions, if not trillions, of dollars. At the same time, the agricultural sector would begin to feel the effects of the storm. Modern farming relies heavily on technology, whether it's GPS-guided machinery for planting and harvesting crops or automated systems for managing irrigation. Without those systems functioning, the efficiency of farming operations would drop dramatically. Farmers might find themselves unable to plant or harvest crops on time, leading to food shortages. Supply chains would struggle to keep up with demand, making it difficult to move food from farms to grocery stores, which would increase prices and possibly trigger widespread panic buying. Basic necessities like food, water, and fuel would quickly become scarce in many places. The consequences would be felt around the world. Nations relying on international trade for vital resources would find themselves unable to import or export goods. In the United States alone, the Department of Energy estimates that a major solar storm could knock out a large portion of the country's electrical grid for a period of months, if not longer. And because many of the transformers that power these grids take months or even years to replace, recovery would be slow and painful. The real danger of a Carrington-level solar storm is that it isn't just an event that passes over. The disruptions caused by the initial impact could stretch into weeks, months, and even years. As industries and infrastructure struggle to recover, society would be forced to adapt. People would have to figure out how to function without the conveniences they rely on every day, from smartphones to online banking. Food shortages could become more severe, and access to clean waters might become a challenge in regions where treatment plants are affected by power failures. The environmental impact of the solar storm would also be significant. Satellite-based weather monitoring systems would be down, making it harder to predict and prepare for other natural disasters, like hurricanes or wildfires. The inability to monitor the atmosphere could lead to unexpected environmental damage, further compounding the challenges of survival in a post-superstorm world. As we move into the following days, the initial chaos from the solar storm continues to unfold. The world is not prepared for something of this scale, and people start to realize just how fragile our reliance on technology truly is. But this is only the beginning. The ripple effects of a solar storm like this would continue to affect every part of life, and the true extent of the damage wouldn't be clear for weeks, months, or even longer. The recovery process, once it begins, will be far from simple. It will take coordination, innovation, and a major effort to rebuild the systems we've come to rely on so heavily. In the next part, we'll look into what happens when the dust settles and how the world would attempt to recover. As the days pass after the solar superstorm, the damage continues to unfold. The initial panic has begun to settle, but the long-term effects of the event are now becoming painfully apparent. Communities are still grappling with widespread power outages. While some parts of the world may have managed to restore basic electricity, entire regions remain without power. The cost to repair the electrical grids is astronomical, and the lack of trained personnel and equipment to replace destroyed transformers only adds to the delay. In some areas, it's estimated that it could take years to fully restore power, leaving entire populations to live without the conveniences of modern life. With electricity still a scarce commodity, many of the world's technological systems remain compromised. Communication networks reliant on satellite connections remain largely offline. While some ground-based systems may have been partially restored, most of the world's cell towers and internet connections are still out of commission. In the absence of reliable communication, communities turn to more primitive methods, like radio broadcasts, to stay informed. However, even these become increasingly difficult to maintain as resources, including fuel for generators, grow thinner. The loss of global connectivity means that people feel more isolated, with a growing divide between those who still have access to information and those who do not. Transportation continues to struggle. Without GPS, air travel is severely hindered. Commercial flights are grounded, and air traffic control systems remain overwhelmed by the backlog of canceled flights. With no reliable way of navigating, airports become chaotic hubs. as people are stranded and unsure when they can return to their homes or reach other destinations. The already stressed transportation system begins to falter under the weight of the crisis. Ground transportation, like trains and buses, also face interruptions due to electrical failures. Some vehicles that rely on electric systems simply stop working, and the lack of fuel due to distribution issues only exacerbates the problem. The agricultural sector, which initially faced struggles, now begins to show signs of collapse in some regions. Fields lie fallow, crops are lost, and the logistical nightmare of delivering food becomes even more critical. While some food production has been salvaged by local farming operations that are more self-sustaining, the global supply chain continues to suffer. The economy of many nations takes a severe hit as businesses shut down or reduce their operations due to the lack of communication and energy to power their production lines. The loss of critical infrastructure means that industries that rely on just-in-time supply chains, like manufacturing, can't keep up with demand, which affects everything from electronics to clothing to car parts. Even in areas with food, prices soar as supply becomes strained and the demand for basic goods increases. Meanwhile, healthcare systems remain under incredible strain. Hospitals, still reeling from the initial failure of medical devices and power outages, struggle to provide care. Emergency medical equipment like ventilators and dialysis machines, which are dependent on a constant electricity supply, are still inoperable in many places. The ripple effect continues to affect people's health with delayed treatments and surgeries. People with chronic conditions are at risk, and the long-term effects on health will compound the crisis in the months ahead. Medical professionals are overwhelmed, and many struggle with the added pressure of not being able to rely on technology that once helped save lives. The social implications of the solar storm become more pronounced as well. As time goes on, people begin to experience more tension and frustration with each passing day. Basic services are disrupted, leading to growing unrest in some parts of the world. Food riots break out in urban areas where access to necessities is most limited. Communities that are already facing socioeconomic challenges are hit the hardest. The divide between the rich and the poor grows wider, with wealthier areas able to secure limited resources while poorer ones face increasing scarcity. In addition to the human cost, the environment also feels the long-term consequences of the solar superstorm. With satellites still down, scientists are unable to monitor weather systems as effectively as they once could. This lack of data leads to significant challenges in forecasting natural disasters. Floods, hurricanes, and wildfires, which were once more predictable, now pose an even greater threat. Without satellite monitoring, predicting the movement and intensity of storms becomes a game of chance. This leads to a lack of preparation and, in some cases, devastating losses when natural disasters hit unexpectedly. The global economy is also starting to unravel. Trade, which relies heavily on digital communication, remains at a standstill. International businesses struggle to manage logistics without reliable systems in place, and governments scramble to fill the gaps. Banks, which rely on digital records for processing transactions, face crippling delays. As stock markets continue to fluctuate and trade disruptions affect companies worldwide, the full economic impact of this solar storm is becoming clearer. Economists predict that the global economy could shrink by a staggering amount, with losses reaching trillions of dollars. While the initial chaos of the event has calmed somewhat, the lasting effects are only beginning to be felt. Recovery will take years, if not decades, and the world will have to adapt to a new reality, one where the reliance on technology that once seemed invulnerable is now seen as fragile and vulnerable. Societies will have to rethink how they interact with the digital world and rebuild the systems that make life possible in the modern age. But even as recovery efforts begin, the question remains: when will the next Carrington-level solar superstorm strike? And will we be any more prepared the next time it happens? The lessons learned from this event could be our only hope for safeguarding the future. As the world continues to recover from the devastating effects of the solar superstorm, it becomes clear that the long-term repercussions will be felt for generations. The rebuilding process is slow, and many systems that once seemed invincible are now being reevaluated. One of the most immediate challenges in the aftermath of the storm is the worldwide push to adapt and fortify infrastructure against future solar activity. Governments, industries, and scientists have come together in a global effort to ensure that, if a similar event were to happen again, humanity is better prepared. The first steps in this rebuilding effort are focused on strengthening power grids. engineers work tirelessly to create more resilient electrical systems that can better withstand geomagnetic storms. The process is costly, with some estimates suggesting that billions of dollars will be spent on upgrading grid infrastructure. A focus is placed on replacing outdated transformers with more advanced models capable of handling the surge of energy that a solar storm could cause. Additionally, there is growing investment in the development of backup systems that can keep critical facilities running in the event of power outages, such as hospitals and emergency services. While progress is being made, many experts warn that it will take decades before the global electrical grid can be fully fortified against the threat of a solar superstorm. In the space sector, lessons learned from the disruption to satellite systems are driving innovation. The vulnerability of communication satellites to radiation damage is now a major concern. The industry has already begun to focus on creating more robust and radiation-resistant satellites. These new satellites will feature enhanced shielding and the ability to recover from temporary outages caused by solar storms. However, it's not just about strengthening the satellites themselves. More attention is now being given to creating better early warning systems that can predict solar activity and provide enough time for satellites to be put into protective modes before being hit by solar flares. This could help prevent complete system failures and reduce the amount of time it takes to restore communication networks after a solar storm. On the ground, communities that were hit hardest by the solar storm continue to rebuild, but many face significant challenges. Rural areas that were disconnected from the global network for months or even years have started to focus on more localized energy solutions, like solar panels and wind turbines, to reduce their reliance on the vulnerable power grid. However, implementing these systems on a large scale is expensive and requires the support of governments and businesses to ensure that renewable energy becomes a viable option for communities in need. The reality is that without these alternative power solutions, many areas could remain at the mercy of solar activity for years to come. As time goes on, social and political dynamics also change. Many governments now place more emphasis on disaster preparedness, with the realization that technological infrastructure must be made more resilient to the increasing frequency of space weather events. In some regions, emergency response systems are being overhauled, and plans are put in place to ensure that people can stay informed during future disasters. There is a growing recognition that the fragility of modern systems means that societal structures could break down in the face of widespread disruption, and thus new frameworks must be established to deal with such crises. The economic recovery remains slow. Supply chains that rely on precise timing and digital systems still struggle to return to full functionality. While some industries have managed to adapt to the new reality, others face ongoing difficulties. The global economy, once highly interconnected and reliant on advanced technology, is now operating in a more fragmented way. This shift has led to greater self-sufficiency in some countries, while others face increasing isolation. The lack of global coordination has been one of the most significant setbacks in recovery efforts, as nations work at their own pace to rebuild what was lost. The impact of the solar superstorm also brings about a cultural shift. People, once accustomed to instant communication and constant digital connectivity, now have a deeper understanding of the vulnerabilities of their technology. There's a growing awareness of how dependent society has become on systems that, in many ways, were never designed to withstand the force of a natural event like a solar storm. In many places, communities have started to rethink how they engage with technology, with some even returning to older methods of communication and transportation. People become more focused on local and sustainable living, trying to become less reliant on the global system that, in a single moment, can fail them. Looking forward, researchers continue to study solar activity, hoping to gain a better understanding of the sun's behavior and develop more accurate prediction models. While the next Carrington-level event could be centuries away or right around the corner, the global community has learned valuable lessons from the last disaster. In a world where technology is so deeply integrated into our daily lives, the importance of preparedness cannot be overstated. The recovery from a solar superstorm, like the one we just experienced, may take years, but with each lesson learned, humanity grows stronger and more resilient in the face of natural events that we can only begin to understand. As we move forward, we'll carry the knowledge that the next solar storm is just as unpredictable as the one we've just lived through, and we must be ready for it. Let's imagine a different reality for a moment. This is a hypothetical, alternate history kind of scenario. What if Mount Vesuvius erupted today with the same fury it had back in the year 79 AD? What would that look like in our modern world? We all know that back then, the eruption buried entire Roman cities, like Pompeii and Herculaneum, under ash and volcanic debris. Thousands of people were killed in just a matter of hours. It's one of the most famous natural disasters in history. But now let's fast forward almost 2,000 years and picture what might happen if that exact same event took place right now. Mount Vesuvius is not some ancient relic. It's a very real and active volcano located in southern Italy, just a few miles from the city of Naples. And Naples is not a small town. It's home to more than 3 million people across its metro area. So if Vesuvius were to erupt the way it did in ancient times, it wouldn't be hitting remote ruins or scattered farms. It would be crashing right into one of the most densely populated regions in Europe. The danger isn't just theoretical either. Scientists have studied the volcano for years, and they know that it has erupted multiple times since 79 AD. In fact, the last eruption happened in the year 1944 during World War II. It wasn't as big as the one in ancient Rome, but it still caused plenty of damage. And ever since then, scientists have been keeping a very close eye on it. The Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology runs a constant monitoring system around Vesuvius. They watch the ground for shifts, listen for tremors, and measure gas levels around the crater. It's one of the most closely watched volcanoes in the world. Still, all the monitoring in the world can't always predict exactly when or how a volcano will blow. If Vesuvius started showing serious signs of activity, it might give a few days or even weeks of warning. But in a worst-case scenario, there might only be hours to act. That means millions of people would have to evacuate very quickly, and that's where the real challenge begins. A lot of towns and cities are built right around the base of the volcano. These are places with homes, schools, hospitals, businesses, everyday life. Some of the people living there are in what's known as the red zone, the area expected to be hit hardest by things like pyroclastic flows, ashfall, and flying debris. In a full-force eruption like the one from the year 79 AD, those pyroclastic flows could race down the mountain at speeds of over 100 miles per hour, destroying everything in their path. Naples would be in the danger zone for heavy ashfall, which can collapse roofs, contaminate water supplies, and make it hard to breathe. If the wind were blowing in just the wrong direction, thick clouds of volcanic ash could smother entire neighborhoods in a matter of hours. Imagine walking outside and seeing the sky turn black in the middle of the day. That's what ancient Roman writings described back then, and the same thing could happen again. Even modern buildings and roads might not stand a chance. Airports would shut down, trains would stop running, and roads could become impossible to drive on because of all the ash and debris. People would panic, traffic would pile up, and emergency services would be overwhelmed trying to manage the chaos. And this is all just the beginning, and that's the reality we're stepping into with this hypothetical. In the next part, we'll take a deeper look at what the first 24 hours would look like during the eruption, how the eruption begins, how fast the situation unravels, and what happens to the people caught in the middle of it. The eruption begins without warning in the early morning hours. First, there's a deep rumble under the earth, followed by a sudden explosion that blasts a massive column of ash and gas into the sky. Within minutes, the top of Mount Vesuvius is hidden behind a cloud that stretches tens of thousands of feet high. Lightning crackles through the ash as the pressure from beneath the volcano is released in violent bursts. People across Naples and the surrounding towns wake up in confusion and fear. Windows rattle, dogs bark, and the ground trembles underfoot. In the first hour, the sky grows darker. The sun disappears behind the thick cloud, and a strange stillness falls over the city. Ash begins falling like snow, slowly at first, then thicker and heavier. Cars are soon covered, streets look like they've been blanketed in gray powder, and it becomes difficult to breathe without some kind of protection. The ash stings the eyes and burns the throat. Local news stations broadcast nonstop, telling people to stay inside if they haven't already evacuated. But it's already too late for many. Closer to the volcano, in towns like San Sebastiano al Vesuvio and Torre del Greco, everything happens fast. The ground splits open in places. Huge pieces of rock are launched from the crater like cannonballs, crashing into buildings and vehicles. Then come the pyroclastic surges, superheated, clouds of gas, ash, and rock moving so fast there's no time to escape. These surges race down the slopes of the volcano, engulfing homes, roads, and anything standing in their path. Temperatures inside these clouds reach over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt metal. Anyone caught in them wouldn't survive. Hospitals begin to fill up quickly with people suffering from burns, breathing problems, and injuries from falling debris. But many doctors and nurses are stranded themselves, unable to reach work through the chaos. Cell service is patchy, power flickers in and out, emergency responders are working without rest, but the roads are jammed with traffic, and visibility is near zero in some areas due to the ash. Helicopters are grounded, boats try to help evacuate people along the coastline, but the sea is becoming rough as the eruption shakes the entire region. The Italian government activates its highest level emergency protocols. Military vehicles begin arriving to help transport people. Shelters in nearby cities like Salerno and Caserta are quickly filled, and more need to be opened in places farther north. Meanwhile, the ash cloud keeps rising. Air travel is shut down across southern Italy, and planes are rerouted away from large sections of Europe. The volcanic ash contains tiny particles of glass and rock that can destroy airplane engines, so every flight near the area is grounded. By the end of the first day, it's estimated that tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed or seriously damaged. Entire towns are silent under layers of ash and debris. The death toll is unknown, but feared to be in the thousands. Rescue workers continue searching through the rubble, calling out for survivors, and trying to locate people who might be trapped. In other parts of Italy and even across Europe, people are glued to their screens, watching live footage of the eruption. It's not just a local crisis anymore, it's a national emergency, with international consequences. Scientists warn that if the eruption continues at this intensity, the effects could stretch far beyond Italy. The ash could enter the upper atmosphere, changing weather patterns and even cooling and global temperatures in the weeks ahead. As the first night falls, people are still trying to get out. The roads are lined with abandoned cars. Some people are walking, covering their faces with scarves and jackets, hoping to make it somewhere safe before the next blast comes. For many, the worst is still to come. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at the fallout during the first month after the eruption, what life looks like for survivors, what challenges Italy faces in rebuilding, and how the rest of the world is affected. In the weeks after the eruption, life across southern Italy changes completely. Naples, once a bustling coastal city full of life and movement, is now buried under layers of ash and broken stone. The air still smells like sulfur, and cleanup efforts are slow and dangerous. Thousands of people who escaped the initial disaster are now displaced, living in emergency shelters or with relatives in other parts of the country. Many homes are gone. Schools, churches, and businesses are shut down. Roads are either damaged or blocked with debris, making transportation difficult. Public health becomes a growing concern. With so much ash still in the air, people are told to wear protective masks at all times. Respiratory issues rise sharply. Hospitals outside the affected zone are overrun with patients from the south. Clean water is hard to come by in some areas because the ash has contaminated reservoirs. Crops in Campania, known for growing tomatoes, olives, and grapes, are destroyed. Farms that weren't buried are coated in fine volcanic dust, and livestock have either fled or perished. The Italian government declares a national disaster and calls for international aid. Help arrives from France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Rescue teams, medical supplies, and cleanup equipment pour in. Engineers begin assessing the long-term damage to infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, and historic buildings. Some towns closer to the volcano are declared total losses. No one will return to live there anytime soon. Beyond Italy, the effects are spreading. The massive ash cloud has been slowly drifting across Europe. Satellite images show it stretching as far as parts of Scandinavia and Western Russia. Airports across the continent are facing delays and cancellations. Shipping routes in the Mediterranean are disrupted, forcing cargo vessels to reroute, raising the cost of goods. In cities like Rome, Milan, and Paris, daily life has changed as people adjust to hazy skies and ash warnings. Climate experts begin to raise alarms. With so much ash and sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere, there is concern about temporary cooling. Scientists compare it to what happened after the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines in the early 1990s, when global temperatures dropped slightly for over a year. It's still too early to know how big the impact will be this time, but computer models suggest a cooler winter ahead for much of Europe and parts of Asia. In southern Italy, tensions are rising. Not everyone is happy with the speed of the government's response. Some communities feel abandoned, especially smaller towns on the edges of the disaster zone. Protests start popping up in nearby cities where displaced families are demanding more support, faster aid, and clearer answers about when they can go home or if they ever can. Emotional fatigue is setting in. Many people are grieving not just lost loved ones, but lost homes, lost routines, and lost futures. Cultural institutions begin their own recovery efforts. Museums and archaeological sites across Italy launch campaigns to save historic artifacts that may have been damaged by falling ash or tremors. Experts from around the world arrive to help preserve churches, ancient statues, and artwork threatened by the disaster. Meanwhile, volcanologists are still studying Mount Vesuvius closely. Small tremors continue to shake the region. Though the main eruption has passed, the volcano is not quiet yet. There are still gas emissions, minor explosions, and a high risk of landslides, as loose ash and rock shift in the rain. Scientists warn that secondary eruptions or mud flows, called lahars, could still hit nearby valleys and low-lying towns. The next challenge is rebuilding. But with ash piled in the streets, destroyed water systems, and power grids still down in some areas, recovery is slow and uncertain. As we move into the fourth and final part, we'll look at what happens a full year later. What has changed, what hasn't, and how this one disaster altered the lives of millions and left its mark far beyond Italy. One full year has passed since Mount Vesuvius erupted with the same force it did back in the year 79. The smoke has cleared, the skies have returned to a soft blue, and the constant tremors have quieted. But in southern Italy, the scars left behind are everywhere. What used to be thriving communities in the shadow of the volcano are now quiet zones of rubble, fenced off and still unsafe. The once vibrant slopes of the volcano are now dry, cracked, and coated in dark ash, with only small patches of new green trying to break through. In the city of Naples, the rebuilding process is slow and uneven. Wealthier districts have made progress. Roads have reopened and businesses are starting to come back to life. But poorer neighborhoods, especially those closer to the old eruption zone, still struggle. Whole blocks remain unlivable. Some residents have decided never to return, choosing instead to rebuild their lives in Rome or abroad. Others stay, holding on to hope that help will eventually reach them. Tourism, which was once a major source of income for the region, has not yet recovered. The famous ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum, already delicate, suffered additional damage from falling ash and tremors during the eruption. Some historic buildings and roads leading to them are still closed. Tourists are hesitant, and local guides and shop owners have been out of work for many months. Hotels that once thrived during summer seasons are either shuttered or operating at half capacity. The environmental impact has started to shift. Some forests that were burned or buried are beginning to grow back. Rivers that had been clogged with ash and debris have cleared out with the help of teams of engineers and natural rainfall. However, the land around the volcano remains unstable. Farmers returning to check on their land are finding that their soil is still too dry or too acidic for planting. Vineyards that once produced prized regional wines may take years to recover, if they do at all. Across Europe, the lasting effects of the ash cloud are still felt. While the skies cleared months ago, the unusual cooling that followed the eruption had an effect on agriculture. Crops in parts of France, Germany, and Eastern Europe produced lower yields during the last harvest season. Some regions experienced an unusually cold winter, especially in northern areas. The global climate impact wasn't as severe as feared, but scientists are still studying long-term changes. Economically, Italy is under pressure. Billions of euros have already been spent on emergency aid, rebuilding, and infrastructure. International support helped during the early weeks, but now the burden lies mostly on Italy's shoulders. Insurance claims, government loans, and public projects are draining funds quickly. Some smaller towns have been quietly written off, marked as uninhabitable for the foreseeable future, their residents permanently relocated. On a human level, the emotional toll remains heavy. Mental health services have seen a sharp increase in demand. People who survived the eruption now face anxiety, grief, and a sense of loss that can't easily be fixed. Children who lived through the evacuation are still adjusting to life in temporary schools. Entire families have been split up by relocation. Communities that once held tight bonds are now scattered. At the same time, some powerful lessons have been learned. Emergency systems are being redesigned across the country, not just in Naples. Early warning systems, communication networks, and evacuation routes have all been updated using the latest technology. The eruption served as a wake-up call not just for Italy, but for every country with active volcanoes. Volcanologists, city planners, and government leaders around the world are reviewing their plans and preparing for the worst. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the modern day changed everything. It reminded the world that nature, no matter how carefully we monitor it, still holds incredible power. It destroyed lives, homes, and history, but it also sparked a global conversation about readiness, resilience, and the importance of respecting the natural forces around us. This disaster may be behind us, but the lessons it left will shape the future for years to come.